Thank you all for joining us for our third and final session of this series called What's Happening. And this series has been put together by Mills Reeve and ORCHA. Just by way of an introduction, I'm Charlotte Lewis. I'm a lawyer at Mills Reeve, and I'm chairing these sessions. They are being recorded, or the other two have been recorded and are available online, and this one has been recorded today. We are using audio subtitles. If you don't wish to see the subtitles, you can select to hide subtitles in the Zoom options, but we choose to use audio subtitles to make the presentations as accessible as possible for all. And at the end of this session, there'll be a feedback form. We would ask you to complete it. Please, it only takes a couple of moments. The reason why it's so important for us to receive this feedback is to help us to improve for further sessions, and also to get an idea of the sorts of things you would like to hear more from us. So it does help to shape what we present to you going forward as well. As I said, this is a third of three. So we're now launching our digital health solutions, and it's very aptly titled Ensuring Everyone is Happy. As I say, this is a third of three. So when we circulate the slides, you'll receive these, and there are links to the previous sessions that are available. And just to say that we have four speakers today. We're very, very honoured to be joined by Ian Pearce, who's the founder of Neuro ProActive, as well as Liz, who some of you met before from ORCHA, and a new speaker from Mills Reeve is Isabel Teare. Just to say that ORCHA, for those who don't know, is the world's leading independent digital health evaluation and distribution organisation, enabling safe digital adoption. And Mills Reeve are a law firm that provide legal and regulatory advice and support for those operating in the health, life sciences and technology sectors, and are considered experts in digital health. And Ian will introduce Neuro ProActive as well, and the work that he's been doing as part of his organisation. I'm going to hand over to Isabel now, who will kick off, followed by Liz, and then Ian will conclude. At the end of the session, or when the three presentations are finished, we'll have a Q&A session, and we will. I can invite you all to add your questions using the Q&A function, and we'll ask those and answer those in the second half of the session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. I would like to talk you through a few issues that we tend to come up with quite frequently, as with the really exciting health tech innovations that we come across, ranging from imaging software, mental health guidance software, patient support tools, apps of various kinds. And each one presents its own profile and issues. But in this session, I just want to touch on a few of the things that we commonly see as products get closer to launch. So the issues I would like to just touch on very briefly are set out here on this overview slide. Medical device regulations, where those apply, contracting issues around privacy, consent and data usage, and then finally a little bit on promotion and marketing. So starting with medical device compliance, many health tech innovations will fall under the medical devices umbrella, and no doubt by this stage of your journey you'll have already assessed and analysed and designed in compliance with the legislation. If your product is a medical device, you'll need to comply with rules on registration and inclusion of the CE or UKCA mark, for example. But as you get to the point of launch, it may be useful to think through whether any evolution in your product or presentation could affect the way that you've analysed medical device legislation compliance. And one thing we sometimes come across, for example, is the classification of the product, and that could have evolved over the course of development. So this is quite a complex area, especially in relation to software, and changes to functionality could potentially move the product into a different risk class. Another area that is of interest at the moment is that the recent introduction to the EU medical devices regime will move some types of software medical device into a higher classification, and this could mean that there's going to be need for external conformity assessment if you are intending to supply into an EU regulated market. And I would point out there that obviously Northern Ireland comes within the EU regime at the moment, while GB stays within the existing regime, which is governed by the UK system. So just moving on here. So there's some very useful guidance available on how you assess medical device software and how you deal with the compliance issues around it. The MHRA has issued some really useful advice on those issues, but taken from that here, I've got a screen that they've provided, the MHRA has provided, which explains how you provide the essential information that you need to provide to users. So if you're, for example, offering an app-based service, it can be difficult to present the necessary information in a way that's will fit into the limited space available. And so here is an example of how you can cover off those issues just on an app screen. And the MHRA helpfully set out what all of those pieces of information are and how you can cover them. So then moving on to my next short topic, I wanted to highlight some of the issues we come across in relation to contracting with your end users. There's two areas I wanted to look at particularly here. Firstly, with the end user license agreement. So you're going to need some kind of contract with your end user. And if that's an individual, for example, downloading a piece of software or an app, then it can be difficult to ensure that your terms and conditions are properly seen and agreed by that consumer. And I'm sure we've all had those experiences where we see a long list of terms and conditions and we don't necessarily pay full attention to them. You need to try and make sure, if possible, that those terms are properly looked at and presented and agreed by the end users. So some kind of click to accept functionality is a useful way of dealing with that. And then a related point, but that arises from legislation, is the need to set out the consumer journey, the user journey, in a way that will take the user through the necessary bits of information they need to see and help them to understand what they need to know. Looking at two particular kinds of areas of legislation that apply here, we've got the consumer contracts regulations, and these set out a user journey with information that's required before the user accepts the product or service that they're being offered. And consumer users signing up will be entering into a so-called distance contract and have to be provided with quite an extensive amount of information in advance, dealing with things like the supplier, the functionality and compatibility of the product, details of any fees or charges that are payable. And a related bit of law that you'll need to think about possibly is the Consumer Rights Act. Now, I mentioned before the issues around long lists of terms on an app, for example, and the requirements for transparency come in there. So the Consumer Rights Act requires the language that you use in relation to consumer users to be very accessible and not in legal language. Plain and intelligible language is a requirement. And there's also a need for fairness. Terms that you use as against a consumer user must be fair in the confines of the legislation. So that means things like unilateral rights to make changes on the supplier's behalf could be deemed unfair and unenforceable. When some of this legislation came in, again, there was attention given in guidance to how you might present some of this information in the confined space of an app download, for example. And this European Commission guidance explains how you can present the information in a very space confined way, and the guidance accepts that, you know, it's difficult to display all of this, but just summarizes how you might be able to do that within the legislation, but presenting it in a confined space. So then I wanted to turn to the area of privacy, consent, and usage of data. Data privacy is an important element of the digital technology assessment criteria that you'll presumably be familiar with, and brings in data protection, impact assessments, and cybersecurity, for example. But I just wanted to focus on some of the areas around different kinds of consent, because this can be a problem. And the types of consent that we need to consider are legally different, and so they have to be addressed in different ways. So, of course, if there's any medical treatment or diagnosis, then patients will need to give their consent to that. But that is a different kind of consent from the other categories. One we come across is informed consent for those who participate in clinical research, and that's another type of consent. But then under data protection legislation, then you're thinking about consent that complies with GDPR or UK GDPR. So when you have, often people assume that consent to data processing will be the right legal basis when they're trying to comply with GDPR. And it's not necessarily the case. That the legal basis for data processing might better be characterized as necessary for carrying out a contract. And then you have an additional requirement for health data, which is deemed to be more sensitive and special category data. So if you are processing health data or intending to, then consideration needs to be given to an additional layer of a condition for processing that data. And here the term explicit consent will normally come in, and this is a kind of a more extreme form of consent requirement, which is necessary when you're considering sensitive personal data. So there we've got the lawful basis for collecting the data, and then a separate layer which is the condition for processing sensitive data. Obviously, you'll need to make sure that your users understand clearly what kinds of data are being collected, and importantly, what the uses are that are envisaged with those categories of data. And if, for example, you've got plans in the future to use data for subsequent purposes, so maybe research, for example, at a later stage, which isn't necessary for the provision of the service, then this might be a good stage at which to seek consent to use data for that additional purpose. Remember always the importance of transparency. Does the individual understand exactly what you're planning to do with each category of data, and why you might wish to do it? And on this next slide, I've set out a few practical privacy tips. By this stage of your product development, you've probably thought through all this, done your data protection impact assessment, planned out your data flows, but just a few tips there on the slide as a reminder. Then the final area I wanted to touch on is promotion and marketing. Now, the different kinds of health technology products will engage different sets of laws and regulations, and it's important to choose the right set that will apply to your situation. And there are lots of helpful codes of practice and self-regulatory codes which both flesh out the legislation and give lots of additional guidance and specific examples. So, for example, when you're marketing or promoting to professional audiences, then the ABHI code will be a helpful resource, especially in relation to medical devices. Promotion of those to healthcare professionals or healthcare organisations is addressed very fully in this code, and it includes a section on advertising rules. And things like the need for accuracy, substantiation, where you refer to other products, the rules around how that is done in a fair way, the use of testimonials or quotations, those are all addressed in the code. If there's any reference to specific named medicines, then you'll be looking at the codes around the promotion of medicines, and there we've got the Blue Guide and the ABEPI code. So for example, it's just important to note that any product which deals with anything which could specifically identify medicine, you'll need to consider whether the medicines rules apply. And then where you're promoting to consumers, you need to take into account the general marketing legislation and codes. The Advertising Standards Authority sets out in its CAP and BCAP codes useful information about how you apply the legislation for promotion of products. And it has, in fact, a special section dealing with medicines, medical devices, and health-related products. So that's section 12 of the code. And that will address areas like the need for objective claims to be backed by evidence. And where you have medicinal claims, then you need to consider whether your product is licensed, and you can't generally make medicinal claims for products that aren't licensed as a medicinal medical device. And there are rules against things that might discourage essential treatment for conditions for which medical supervision should be sought. So make sure that people aren't being encouraged by for example, by the app not to seek treatment in a situation where that should be the course that they follow. If there are medicines, again, if there are medicines involved, then you'll need to consider specific rules on medicines. The PAGB code on advertising code of practice explains how you can address that when you have a consumer audience. So those are just a few of the things that we regularly come across as we prepare for the launch of health technology products. And not all of these will come up all the time, and they tend to be frequently seen. So that was a quick overview, and I'll now hand back to Charlotte for the next stage.
Typical. Thanks so much, Isabel. I should say I didn't actually properly introduce Isabel, but she's one of our lawyers at Mills Reeve, specialising in life sciences and healthcare. Liz is going to speak next with some words of advice from her and ORCHA. Are you okay to share your screen, Liz?
I am indeed. Yes, thank you so much for having me again today. Let me just start my slides from the beginning. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Liz Ashall-Payne, and I'm the founding chief exec at ORCHA. And we've been really supporting these sessions really to help people and innovators particularly know what to do to be compliant with regulations, standards, how to build a business case, a return on investment tool. And today's session, really what I wanted to do was share with you a little bit more from a very practical point, how to get ready to be procured, and then how to activate your client to use your innovations, and then ensuring renewal, because that's really challenging. So it's quite a practical presentation that I've got. Hopefully it's useful. And the first practical thing that I just wanted to share, which you will all know already, is that now is the time for digital health. You know, we've known that digital health could have a huge impact on populations and patients' health for years, but since the start of COVID, we've absolutely seen the rise of digital health and the need for digital health. And the phrase that I keep hearing is the genie is out of the bottle. And so now is the time, and many more organisations are keen to engage with, procure and utilise the opportunities that we have within the world of digital health. And I just wanted to re-mention some of the stats that we have across our digital health libraries, and the significant increase in the engagement of healthcare professionals in engaging and recommending digital health technologies to their patients, which, as you can see, has shown a staggering 6,500% increase. Just for those of you who have also listened to the other sessions, we've talked a lot, particular sessions from ORCHA, about that first step on how to engage with the NHS, very much around having an approval, building trust in your solution, which is driven by national policy standards and legislation. We've obviously touched on a number of those different policy standards and legislations. And what I'm really going to talk to you through now is about how do you engage after you've achieved that compliance. So you can see the areas that we then need to think about is how do we then distribute these high quality digital health solutions that meet the regulatory requirements to populations, healthcare professionals, how do we get these embedded into care? And really importantly, how do we achieve economic sustainability through procurement? And that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start with the end in mind. So how do you get procured? And we all know that procurement is a real challenge. And as people from industry, you will have experienced those challenges. For those of you who don't know me, my background is the NHS. I spent over 20 years in the NHS. And what I can absolutely tell you is it's also and to be honest, more challenging from the NHS side. The hurdles to get through are really difficult and time consuming. And so what I want to do is share with you some top tips as to how you can help the system engage with you and get you procured. But what that starts with is pretty simple. It starts with getting on a procurement framework. In order to be commissioned or procured, you need to be on a framework. And these frameworks are basically supermarkets which the NHS can use to buy and commission tools that they want to engage with. And there are a number of them. I'm just going to share with you, first of all, one, and then I'm going to indicate a few others that you might want to be aware of. So the LPP dynamic purchasing system is the one that's out there specifically for health and social care apps. And we as ORCHA work with London procurement partners. We've created this DPS, which means that for products that meet those regulatory requirements, they can now go into this repository and be procured safely by the NHS and by public sector at large across the country. This is dynamic, and that dynamic element means that it's always open, it never closes. So a lot of frameworks do close. I'll talk to you in a minute about some of those which are also really helpful. But what this means is that when you're ready to launch your product, you need to think about finding a procurement framework that you can list your product in. And this one's open all the time. It's specifically relevant to people who have digital health apps and app-based technologies. And you can use the QR code on the screen and have a view. There is no cost to getting onto this. The only challenge is to get through the review process to make sure that you can get on there and be trusted. So that's open all the time. Because it's dynamic, it also means that after you've launched your product, if you need to change the costs around your solution, you can do that. So dynamic just means it's open all the time and you can amend as required, which is really useful because as digital health technologies innovate all the time, new functions and features may emerge, and therefore you might want to list those new functions and features. But there are other frameworks that you really need to be aware of. So G-Cloud 12 is currently out there. You won't be able to get on G-Cloud 12 because that one isn't a dynamic procurement tool. This is an open and closed tool, but my understanding is that it's going to be open within the next 10 to 12 months. So keep an eye out for G-Cloud 13 and get yourself on there. Another one is the HSSF. There are lots of different lots that you may be able to link in with. And there's also two others. One that I just wanted to identify. One is with NHS Digital, which is a buying catalogue, which is very specific procurement frameworks for very specific areas of work, like primary care. And then you've got the NHSX dynamic procurement system, and there's lots and lots of different frameworks here for lots of different areas. So for example, telehealth, there's one on ophthalmology, and I'd really advise you to go and have a look, because if your tool meets the requirements, get yourself on those. And they are dynamic, again, meaning that they're open all the time, so you're able to get on there when you're ready to do that launch. So those are frameworks. It's really important that we're on frameworks, because it means that the processing is easier for everybody involved. So once you're on a framework, is that it? And I'm sure that you already know the answer to this. The answer is no, it's not. Before you're able to get a contract, you do need to lay some of the foundations. And these are some of the lessons that we've learned and that we've heard from other people. So when you're writing your proposals for any would-be clients, you need to be really careful about aligning what your product or service does to internal strategies and programs. The second thing is help to write the business plan. So for your commissioner or procurer, they have to put together a business plan which is very, very clear about what return on investment the organisation is going to get as a consequence of procuring your product. And I think it was in the last session where there was quite a lot of conversation about how you build that return on investment plan. So create a business plan which has the client in mind, and tell them very specifically what their return on investment will be. The other thing we'd recommend is write the program initiation documentation. Help your client to be able to know what's going to happen at launch of the program. And basically what I'm saying is, if you can help them to do the paperwork, as we know, healthcare systems on a global scale are under a lot of pressure because they're having to layer on the challenges with COVID. So if you can help them get there, that will quicken up the process. And then another key foundation is agreeing what success looks like for year one. So 100% adoption is not going to happen. So be really clear about what you expect and agree what success looks like in that first year. So that will hopefully, both of those things will get you to a point of having a contract. So is that when it's done, you think, yes, I've got a contract, I've launched my product, I'm on a procurement framework, I've managed to get a contract, is that it? And I'm sure that, again, you will know that the answer is no, there is now more to do. So once you get a contract, it's all about having a very successful relationship with that client and making sure that you achieve what you wanted to achieve. And here are some more foundation things to think about. So we talked about agreeing what success looks like, but we need to map and report against those success. Are we achieving what we said we were going to achieve? Let's make sure that we're feeding data back to the procurer or commissioner. In order to do that, you need to find a champion on the client side. So working with somebody who's your champion, who's really going to support your implementation from the client side, is absolutely critical. But that's not enough. You also need to work with a team. So find not just a champion, but make sure that you have somebody on the client side from communications, clinical or medical, and project management. Not enough though, you also need an executive sponsor, ideally somebody at board who's able to break through any barriers that you come across. And because there's a whole team here, both on your side and the client side, you need to set very, very clear roles and timescales. And I would advise having weekly catch-ups, even if it's only for 15 minutes, just to check in, to make sure that everybody's doing what they said they were going to do. And those are the foundations. You now get onto some of the challenges. It's now about embedding your innovation into clinical care. And the reason all of this is so important is because at the end of that first year, or maybe first 2 years, depending on how long you've been commissioned for, you're going to want to be looking for a renewal. So you have to prove that you've been able to embed your innovation into clinical care. And it's not as simple as just deploying a trusted solution. What we need to be really thinking through is what are the pre-launch communications, and we need to raise awareness across the communities that you're wanting to engage with. And this is just about raising awareness. This is coming, get ready. You then need to agree pre-launch training. One of the things that I really go on about is the fact that as clinicians, which I was, we're not trained in how to adopt and use digital innovations and new tools. So we need to think through what is the training for the communities that we want to deploy our solution to. And this is about ensuring engagement. And the engagement piece is about letting your communities that you want to work with ask questions and answer some of the difficult questions that they might have. And then once you've raised awareness and you've engaged, you can then move to work with the team to embed the product into a pathway. And this is really important. So your product will be best fit and have the highest return on investment at a specific point in a pathway for a specific clinical group. And it's about helping your communities to know when to deploy the solution. And that's when you'll achieve conversion. So those are like my top tips, but there are a few other just underpinning things for you to just be aware of, because what we really want to see is you achieving sustainable growth. And the way to do that is really with these underpinning principles. So the first is you're going to need to be tenacious. It's not necessarily easy, but keep mission driven and be really clear about why you're doing this and keep going. The second thing is to keep learning. There's always changes happening, particularly in the NHS. So you need to keep learning, keep thinking about how your solution can meet the needs of who you're trying to sell your product to. The third thing, and it sounds really simple, but you need to find and follow the money. There are buckets of money and pockets of money, but not everybody will have that budget. So this is, I suppose, a bit of a qualification, disqualification to help you know where to go and invest that tenacity and learning. And the fourth underpinning principle is stop piloting. I think it's okay to do a demonstrator site, but once you've proved that your innovation meets regulatory and compliance requirements and can achieve a return on investment, we need to stop the piloting and start to scale the product for impact. So thank you so much. I think we're going to take questions at the end of all the presentations.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Liz. Yeah, we will, but if you've got questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We've already had a question which Isabel has kindly answered, so we can answer them sort of by text, and we'll also obviously be able to discuss them in the Q&A. Ian, you're going to tell us a sort of real life story. We've got the advisors and when Liz and Isabel sitting there cosily behind their desks, but you've really been on the sort of the front line of this. So very excited to hear your story and how things have gone for you in Neuro ProActive. Thanks, Ian.
Sure, thank you very much. And good advice from Liz, as always. A lot of that resonates with our story, which has taken place over the last three and a half years now. Just by way of introduction, first of all, an admission: I have absolutely no healthcare qualifications whatsoever. I failed my first aid exam at the age of 14, and I never looked back from that. But Neuro ProActive will launch this month. And the reason I'm involved in this, I founded it, is because in 2017, my dad had a stroke. And, you know, I discovered a lot of the things that everyone does in that situation as it relates to the care pathway and the lack of communication, the lack of coordination. And yeah, for the last 3.5 years, this has kind of been my drive. It's interesting, Liz talking about tenacity. I think I've had to be fairly tenacious with getting this off the ground. So what is Neuro ProActive? Well, basically what we're trying to do is we are trying to address a lot of the issues which are similar across all neurological conditions. So we are a therapist-led platform. We have 6 AHP disciplines on Neuro ProActive. They are physios, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, dietitians, arts therapists, and clinical psychologists. And those really are the 6 disciplines which are needed for neurological rehabilitation or the management of long-term conditions. A lot of the guidance which is set out in various documents talks about self-management, patient self-management, and how important that is. But as is frequently the case, we tell people what they should be doing, but we don't provide them with an infrastructure which enables them to do it. So Neuro ProActive from a patient perspective is really that sort of that self-management infrastructure. Okay, what you should be doing when, and all of these interventions on the platform that the patient has are prescribed by a qualified and regulated allied health professional from one of those 6 disciplines. Inpatient to outpatient transition is frequently a big issue in neuro rehab or in many aspects of healthcare. So by providing the patient with that self-management platform, we hope to sort of smooth that transition from inpatient to outpatient care. The postcode lottery is a phrase that's used widely within neuro rehab. You know, care is highly variable across the country, and what we want to do is provide a leveler which enables patients and their families to kind of level up care as much as we possibly can. We include family members on the platform. That's within the NICE guidance. You know, they talk about how important it is to include family members in rehabilitation. So we've got them on the platform, and you know, we're pretty unique in the respect that, you know, we've got one platform with therapists, patients, family members, or parents, guardians for those under the age of 18 or with severe cognitive impairment. We offer remote monitoring. We've got encrypted end-to-end messaging and video calling. And the whole idea really is to provide a platform that is a sort of one-stop shop for any needs that patients have as it relates to those kinds of therapies and the delivery of that rehabilitation. So as I said, we've got 4 member groups to the platform, those AHP disciplines, family members, parents and guardians, but we're really putting the patient right in the middle of it. So they feel supported, they feel as if they've got a team around them. And you know, within that team, you know, communication and coordination is freely available. So just to give you a brief outline, a lot of this I'll have gone through already. We've been 3 years in development. It's been a hell of a long journey. In terms of the scale of the problem that we're trying to solve, over 12 million, 1 in 6 of the UK population have a neurological condition, and they vary from, typically there's 2 types. You've got acquired conditions, which can be stroke, traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, and then you have progressive conditions like dementia, MS and MND. But what is common to all of these conditions is that they require one or a combination of those 6 therapy disciplines. So it really is a massive problem that we're trying to solve with this. And you know, aside from you know, this being the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. Neuro rehab suffers from horrendous underinvestment, and if you look at the top 6 neurological conditions, they cost the UK economy £80 billion per year, so huge. You know, the equivalent of 2 furlough schemes. We're a therapist-led solution. I am, you know, adamant that you know, there's nothing better than a qualified AHP when it comes to neuro rehab. We support NHS and private practice. So as well as having all of these various member groups on the platform, We also support private practice and their ability to work with the NHS, and that is pretty unique as well. But it's frequently the case with neuro rehab that patients have to turn to those in private practice because, you know, funding and resource is not what it needs to be, and frequently not what it needs to be to deliver on those nice guidance. We're built to medical device standards. Liz has already talked about this. ISO 13485 and MDR. That's really important. And you know, I think we're fast approaching a point where if you have a healthcare application and it's not a medical device, then it just isn't going to work, and it's certainly not going to work for the NHS. The whole platform has been self-funded. So myself and the developers have basically formed a JV on this. We have no venture capital money, no private equity money. That's not to say that we couldn't have got it. But not having investment that requires a 20+% return on equity every year means that we can make the platform more affordable for our members. And you know, at the outset, what we really wanted to do was develop something that was best in class, something that really addressed some of these really important and prevalent problems, but also make it really cheap. And Liz has already talked about the return on investment for anyone who's going to procure it. You know, there's two ways that you can do that. You can provide a big benefit, and you can lower your cost, and hopefully that's the end of the scale that Neuro ProActive will sit at. Our pre-production version, so we go live this month, later on this month, probably month end, but we have a pre-production version live at UCLH, the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery. If you're going to do a pilot, if you're going to do some live testing, then you might as well go to the best place in the country. You know, I think it's going to be hard for anyone to argue that the guys at Queen Square don't know what they're doing. And when we launch our production version at the end of the month, we will go live at 6 NHS trusts throughout the UK. And that's a mixture of well-performing trusts, some not quite so well-performing, a mixture of adults and pediatric patients. So, you know, we should get a lot of feedback very, very quickly from those sites. And separate to that, I'm having discussions with ICSs and ISDNs, which are obviously large procurers at this point. So let's have a bit of fun with this, because not all of my experience has been particularly great. You know, it is a real slog at times, and you will come across people who you know, question you know, the benefits of what you're producing. They tend not to be clinicians, but other types. So, you know, what is the edge of this? You know, what's the patient need? That's really important to address at the outset. So the National Institute for Health Research has produced a list of 55 unmet patient needs as it relates to neuro rehab. Neuro ProActive directly addresses 33 of those. Patient need is very important. We can write to primary care records. We can connect to hospital systems. Another issue with neuro rehab is that, you know, patients tend to move around, and their records can be really hard for the new therapy team to get hold of. So we put the patient in charge of their data, and they can decide who sees it. All platform availability is really key. You know, you really can't run something that's only web-based or only iOS-based. You have to be on all 3 of those platforms if you want large-scale adoption. Full NHS digital compliance. You know, Liz and the team at ORCHA are experts on this, but you really do have to tick those boxes if you want to get into the NHS. You know, they're going to want to see that you know, your platform is compliant before the conversation even starts. We're aligned to NICE guidance, as I said, and also the NHS long-term plan. You know, the NHS long-term plan was published quite a while ago now, and it tends to be forgotten about at times, but there's some really, really good points in there. And there's a very specific one as it relates to neuro rehab and the intensity of neuro rehab. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the platform. We don't claim to do AI, right? So if I had any hair, I would tear it out at times. There is this absolute obsession within health tech on artificial intelligence. And I don't have any healthcare qualifications, but I do have a master's degree in engineering. And I can tell you that AI does not exist, right? Because unless you've achieved the singularity, you don't have AI. You might have machine learning, but you don't have AI. And people who claim to do AI have two problems. One, they're not telling you the truth because artificial intelligence doesn't exist. And the second problem that they've got is they have bad grammar, because do AI makes absolutely no sense to me at all. Aside from addressing the sort of day-to-day issues, which I've discussed, one of the things that we've attempted to do with this is to really assist the research effort in neurological conditions. It's very, very difficult to get, for researchers to get a large enough data set for them to draw significant conclusions. So we've built a database on the back of Neuro ProActive. Members can consent to their anonymized data being written down to that research database. Now, if we get the kind of large-scale adoption that we think we will, that could lead to, you know, hundreds of thousands of data sets, which just simply aren't available to the NIHR at the moment. And we've partnered up with the NIHR on this database. We are developed, not by me, because I have no qualifications to decide what the platform should do or should look like. You know, we've engaged with hundreds of AHPs, families and patients over the last 3 years, countless therapy teams all over the country treating, you know, various conditions. And that's really important because aside from the viability of your product, you're going to have to evidence that you know, you have this clinical assurance, you have this this backing from your member base. So we've spent a lot of time on that. So there are some people that I've come across, and I'm going to be explicit about this. This is my opinion. It is not the opinion of Mills and Reeve or ORCHA, but it is in my experience over the last 3 years. There are some organizations and individuals within those organizations that really do not offer any value when it comes to implementing your solution and formulating your product. So if I was to offer you any advice in terms of the people that you meet, avoid people who say amazing, right? Like some Made in Chelsea TV character. One of the issues, I think, from my perspective over the last 3 years, is that, you know, there are organizations that exist, and their existence is to support and to scale up innovations exactly like Neuro ProActive. But what I've found is that what they tend to do is sort of try and align themselves with successful or success stories. And when it comes to getting those pilots, when it comes to getting large scale adoption, they don't really have the answer. You know, as I said, we're live in a pre-production format at UCLH. UCL partners have had no contribution to that. That's simply me, the developers, and the therapists working hard. And when it comes to, you know, innovation in health tech, a lot of organizations just signpost, right? So they'll tell you to go and speak to this person, or or read, X, Y, and Z. But what you really want is you want to know what is going to be effective clinically, and you might want to know where you can find funding. And that's not to say, that it isn't there, but certainly one of the reasons that neuro rehab is in the state that it is in is because certain organizations have refused to back it or invest in it commercially. So yeah, we've had no input from the UK PLC, as it were. Reverse engineering your launch. I think, Liz alluded to this, and it's absolutely right. You need to think about what the regulatory landscape looks like, what good compliance looks like, and really design your product at the outset to achieve those standards. I put in here, remember the 6 Ps. Perfect planning prevents piss poor performance. It's hugely important. Make sure you work with healthcare specific developers. Okay, there are so many people that will want to take your money, develop an app for you, but if you mention ISO 13485 or EIC 27001, they will not know what you're talking about. And given the more stringent regulatory landscape that we've got, you're onto a massive loser if you don't pick the right developer. So my developer is based in Cambridge. As I said, we're now a JV with them. They host this. They on a main server, and they have a backup server, and then we have the research database. They are healthcare specific developers. Pretty much everybody there is a graduate of Cambridge. Every time I get on a Zoom meeting with them, I find that my head hurts after about half an hour. Talk to ORCHA about the regulatory landscape. I mean, I've been, talking to Liz and her team for probably 2.5 years now, and they've been enormously helpful when it comes to explaining to a guy who had no idea what a medical device was, 3 years ago, and bringing me up to speed on that regulatory landscape. It's really, really important. And medical device registration, as I said, is key. So, if your developer is a 22-year-old with a degree in Hungarian basket weaving, they're probably not going to deliver you something which can be registered as a medical device. And large-scale adoption in the NHS requires passing the new DTAC. We know this. The DTAC replaced I can't remember what it was. It was the NHS digital one. So there we go. DAC, that's it. Thank you, Liz. So the DTAC is the new NHS X standard, and it's a very binary thing. You either pass it or you don't. We think that we're going to walk the DTAC. We'll wait and see how long it takes to get through that process. That this comes back to planning. Think about whatever solution it is that you've got in the pipeline, and how you get over that line, because that's really key at the moment. So this is a really common misconception, right? That the NHS is difficult to work with. When I started out, I would tend to call, the chief exec's office in a trust, and then you get sort of passed down to middle management, and not all of them have a clinical background. So, in many cases, they don't know what you're talking about. But that being said, the NHS is not difficult to work with if you take the right approach. So a lot of funding applications will ask for your evidence of PPI, public patient involvement, and that's really key. Speak to clinicians, speak to patients, speak to family members. There's a stroke support charity called Different Strokes. I attend their regional meeting every week, and it offers a great, and I just listen. You know, it's a great way to understand a little bit more about the challenges that patients and clinicians are facing. So you really can't talk to enough of your end user base. Don't try and force technology on people. The number of sort of innovations within health tech, which are, you know, very clever. You know, if it was a science project, it would probably get an A. But when it comes to clinical use and the cost of these things, you know, they just die a death when they get put into pilot, because they either have very limited benefits and high cost, or you know, they're just not, or they have no benefits at all. If you speak to a lead, make sure that they are a clinical lead. There are a number of individuals sort of wandering around in various organizations who are the, you know, innovation, transformation, coordination lead. They're not going to offer any value whatsoever. Okay. And they just find things interesting, and they might signpost you off to another place. Clinical leads, on the other hand, are extremely important, because they run clinical teams and they have a lot of experience. So they are worth talking to. There is no such thing as the NHS. This was a comment I had from somebody about 3 years ago, and I think it's true. You know, there is no such thing as the NHS, only NHS trusts, and that was true then. It's certainly true now. I think the last count, we're at sort of 274 NHS trusts in the UK. They all have, you know, their own sort of management departments. Liz has talked about the procurement platforms and getting on there, and obviously integrated care services are trying to bring that procurement process sort of far more regionally, with a whole number of NHS trusts in place, so they move as one. You know, Greater Manchester has operated that way for a number of years because it's, well, frankly, it's very sensible. But you know, trying to have those conversations with individual trusts is pretty hard. What I would say is that whatever solution you've got, try and get the best NHS trust on board, the one that every other trust looks to in that particular area. So of the 6 NHS trusts that are adopting Neuro ProActive at launch, 5 of them are teaching hospitals, and obviously one of them is UCLH, which, you know, is generally considered, you know, best in practice as it relates to pretty much anything with neurological conditions. Free trials in the NHS are a reality. You are going to have to give your product to them for free to try it. I was at a meeting once, I think it was with one of the AHSNs, where they said this, and then, you know, half the people around the table just rolled their eyes to the ceiling, and I thought, well, you know, kind of what do you expect? So if you've got an expensive solution, you know, just realize that you know, you're going to have to give the NHS a free trial before you can talk about any sort of procurement. If you're looking for clinical assurance through an efficacy implementation clinical trial, whatever you want to call it, that research has to be independent. The study has to be independent of you, and the collection of data, the presenting of that data on the back of that trial must be independent. One of the reasons that I've specifically tried to recruit teaching hospitals for Neuro ProActive is because they obviously have a wealth of academics linked to those trusts, which you know, can produce that study quite cost effectively. In terms of adoption, I mean, you know, I took a very sort of bottom-up approach on this. First of all, I like speaking to clinicians. I find it always a value add. But if you get those teams on board, if they feel that their feedback is being taken into account in the development of whatever it is you're producing, and then you present it to them, they will then start and demand that solution or your solution internally. So rather than sort of forcing it on people, you're getting those in the trenches, those at the coal face, to kind of really want your product, and that's worked incredibly well. So when I speak to various people in health tech and I say, yeah, we've got 6 trusts on board at launch, they always say, like, well, how did you do that? And the reality is, I went and spoke to the clinical teams and engaged with them. And yeah, I mean, in 3 years to have developed what we have and to have, a fairly significant NHS buy-in already, I'm told is pretty good. That's a pretty quick development path. If you think about middle management, and this is not just true in the NHS, it's true of everywhere, they are very unlikely to have an argument with a head consultant that's been doing the job for 20 years. So this sort of goes back to getting the teams on board. If you speak to the team, you get them on board, they like what it is that you've got, they will then bring in the head consultant. The head consultant will frequently listen to their team if they're a good consultant, and then it's the head consultant that will go and bang the drum for you. I mean, if I think about someone like Nick Ward at UCLH, no middle manager is going to have an argument over neuroscience with Nick Ward. So that bottom up approach, I really couldn't recommend that highly enough.
Ian, we're going to have to cut you off there. I'm really sorry.
No worries.
Did you want to just take 30 seconds to wrap up your final
slide?
Yeah,
I am wrapping up. Yeah, sorry. So in my experience, a lot of people in health tech have 2 problems. 1, they don't understand healthcare. Number 2, they don't understand technology. If clinicians and patients are happy with your solution and excited about it, then you should be as well. That's the only opinion that really counts. Innovation is an iterative process. You've got to be prepared to do the rounds. You've got to be prepared to put the groundwork in, and you've got to be prepared to go back, time and time again. A lot of people in health tech call themselves experts. In my experience, if you're an expert, you don't need to tell people that you're experts. And there's a lot of innovation experts doing the rounds as well. And the last point I would make is that innovation does not have to be complicated. You don't have to be in artificial intelligence to be an innovator. Innovation can and frequently is very simple. If you want to know more about Neuro ProActive, you can check out our website or follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. If you do have any questions that you'd like answering, then if you can contact me by email, contact details are on the slides, and actually on everybody's slides we'll be circulating those after the event together with a copy of the recording. It just leaves me to say thank you to Isabel, Liz and Ian for speaking today, in particular obviously to Ian for coming and joining us and sharing his journey and at a moment in time where it's so poignant for this particular event around launch. That's the end of this session and the end of the series. So thank you. Do provide some feedback and let us know how you found it. Thank you. Cheers all. Bye.